Hello everyone, I am Rahat Hassan, working as Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, Aligarh. Before going to start this particular lecture, I once again would like to welcome all of you in this particular online course on international relations in a changing world. Today, I will be speaking on a particular topic which is again very much important and related to our previous discussion on international society approach. In this particular lecture, we will discuss on a particular issues in international society approach, that is statecraft and responsibility. So that particular topic is statecraft and responsibility is again related to the international society approach. So before going to start this particular topic, statecraft and responsibility, I would like to mention what we will do in this particular class. So that the structure of this class is, we will discuss international society approach in a very brief way so that we can recall the discussions that we have done in the last few classes. And that review of the topic, that is international society approach to understand or to know or to investigate the dynamics of international relations, it is very important to recall that or to understand that. Then only we can be able to discuss or understand this particular topic, that is statecraft and responsibility. So first, in that particular lecture, we will discuss the international society approach, the basic premises, the basic tenets or the characteristics or the feature of international society approach, and the basic values associated with that, that is the conception of order and justice. Then we will discuss the basic conception of statecraft and responsibility. That is the introductory discussion on the statecraft and responsibility. In this particular lecture, we will also try to understand or try to discuss the another things which is again related to the topic statecraft and responsibility, is the various dimension of the statecraft responsibility, means the various kinds or the responsibility of the statecrafts or the state people. In that, the particular mention we will do on national responsibility, international responsibility of the statecrafts, and lastly the humanitarian responsibility of the statecraft. So that three dimension of responsibility of the state person or the state people or statecrafts, we will discuss that. And then after, as this lecture is the final lecture on the topic international society approach, we will try to critically analyze the topic of international society. In that particular critical analysis, we will analyze the things, or we will critically analyze the international society approach from the perspective of realism, from the perspective of liberalism, from the perspective of international political economy, and also we will try to investigate or we will try to understand or critically analyze the international society approach from the perspective of solidarities. In that particular, the transnational society, global society, and the global injustice, from that point of view, we will try to estimate or we will try to critically analyze the international society approach, and finally we will try to wind up the discussion with the conclusion, the critical remark or the critical assessment of the topic, that is international society approach, to investigate or to understand that international society approach. So going back to our discussion, the first thing we will discuss, that is the international society approach. How that international society approach look at the dynamics of international relations. So in that context, we have already discussed in detail about the international society approach, how it is different from liberalism, how it is different from realism. That is the another classical approach to investigate and to understand the dynamics of international relations. So in that, the international society approach as is a combination of the three tradition of international relations, or the classical traditions of international relations. One is the realistic approach, or the realism, rationalism, and revolutionarism. So we have already discussed that. We will just give a kind of overview of these things so that we can understand the international society approach, or rather we can recall the international society approach, and then we will connect that topic with our main topic, that is statecraft and responsibility. So as we know that the realistic approach is talking about or consider state as a primary actor in international relation. So it is the state behavior or state relations in the state system, and they argued that the state has the primary objective or the primary responsibility of the state person or the state is to protect the behavior of the state is to protect the national interest of that particular nation. And at the same time, they also describe that the nation state system based on the anarchical kind of situation which prevail in the nation state system. So in that context, the power orientation, the national power struggle for power among the states in the nation state system, and the anarchical condition which prevail in the nation state system is the basic characteristics which is propagated by the realistic school of thought, or the realistic school of international relation. So in that sense, the realists try to investigate the basic dynamics of the international relations in terms of power orientation. So power is very important, and the state try to maximize its power just to protect the national interest of that particular nation. And at the same time, anarchy is there, which means that there is no common government and there is no common agencies to control the state behavior or the state selfish behavior in the nation state system, that we have already discussed in detail about that. So the Morgenthau's principles, Hobbesian conception, Machiavellian conception, Thucydide conception related to the interpretation of international relations, they argued that there is a kind of power struggle among the state, and the power is the only means through that the state can protect its national security and national interest. And the conception of state-centric self-help and self-survival, these are the key components of the realistic approach to understand international relations. Against that, in reaction of that sort of realistic approach to international relations, we have another tradition of international relations that we call as the liberal interpretation or the rational interpretation of international relations, where state again considered as a primary actor, but state is also considered as a legal actor in international relations, where the state is not engaged in the struggle for power. Rather, state would behave in a more rational way, and the state would behave in a rational and responsible way. The reason behind that cooperations among the state is that the liberal approach to international relations, they do not consider that the state behave in an anarchical condition, which means that there is absence of anarchy in the nation state system. And because of that absence which means that anarchical situation replaced by the international organization and also the international law, which means that the state would abide the rules and regulations of the nation state system, which is defined in terms of international law. And at the same time, there is an international organization, or we can say the international organization, the rules and regulations are or will be abided by the state, because the state are the members of that organization, or state are also considered as a member of the nation state system. So in that sense, state will try, all the state in the nation state system, trying to identify the common goals which are mutually acceptable to all, and which are mutual objective of all state in the nation state system. So in that context, we can say, for example, economic development, for example, peace, for example, development and other sort of things which are very common to every state. And for that sense, to achieve that sort of common objective, the state would try to cooperate among themselves so that the mutual objective, the mutual goal can be achieved by the all state in the nation state system. So there will be no conflict, rather there is a kind of cooperation. The another school of international relations, or the tradition of the international relation, is the revolutionary conception of the IR. So in that sense, the conception of global society, the conception of humanistic approach to look at the international relations, where the state would consider every citizen living in any part of the world, means the individuals living in any part of the world, it is the responsibility of the state system to protect the rights of that individuals. So in that context, the concept of human rights, the concept of justice of the people, and concept of the protection of the rights and rights of the all people in the state system is also the prime responsibility of the every state in the nation state system. So the conception of global kind of society or the world society, these are the example of the revolutionary concept of international tradition. So in that context, the international society approach is not discarding or accepting the approach of any one particular school of thought or school of thought or tradition of the international relations. Rather, the international society approach tried to combine the basic essence or the positive essence or the positive positive things which is there in all three traditions of international relations: the realistic international approach to international relations, the revolutionary approach to international relations, and also the rational school of thought or the rational school of international relations. So they consider that there is a constant dialogue among all three traditions of the international relations. In addition to that, the international society approach consider that it is not the state that are primary actor in the international relations. Rather, it is the state peoples or the statecraft, those people who are actually in the position to run or to take the decision on behalf of the state or make the decision on behalf of the state. So that state people, for example, the prime minister, for example, president, for example, bureaucrats, for example, ministers, for example, army commanders. So those people who are actually in the business of the policy making, or rather we can say the foreign policy making on behalf of the state. So they make the decision and they also implement the decision. So that state people, they or the statecraft, they are the important actors in the international relation, and that things is considered as a very important actor so far as the international society approach is concerned. So the foreign policy making, the conception of war, conception of diplomacy, disarmament, human rights, issue of international human rights. So all those aspects that needs a kind of decision, and that decision is taken by the state peoples or the statecraft. So the relations of the state in the nation state system is also more about a kind of decision which is taken by the statecraft or the state person. So in that perspective, we can identify that international relations from the international society perspective, they consider the roles and the responsibility of the statecraft or the state person is very important, so far as to understand, so far as to know the dynamics of international relation. So in that context, the state people's role and the foreign policy or the rather international relation is more about a kind of human approach or human activities which is related to making of the foreign policy. So in doing or in implementing and formulating the foreign policy by the state person on behalf of the state, it also reflecting or taking into account the experience of the state peoples, is experience about the environment, experience about the about the social system, experience about the historical events which are experienced by the state peoples, and also the various normative approach that also impacting the policy making process or the decision making process or the foreign policy making process taken by or done or formulated by the state people or the statecraft. So in that sense, we can make out that the international society approach is more focusing about the traditional approach of international relations, where the norms, the values and the values, norms and the objective of the society are taken into consideration more in compare to the realistic approach that look at the international relation in terms of state system. So in that context, there is a kind of differences between the international society approach and the realistic approach to international relations. So the realistic approach to international relations look at the international system in terms of anarchical state system, where the anarchy is the natural things, anarchy is the prevailing condition in the nation state system, and the state are the main actors in international relations. But in the case of international society approach, Hadley Bull, the primary or the one of the exponent of the international society approach, he focused on or he considered international relations in terms of anarchical system of the society. So in place of state, the exponent of the international society approach, they focusing on the society, which means that international relations, the understanding of international relations or the analysis of the international relations more in terms of society of the state. So in place of state system or nation state system, the international society approach, the exponents of the international society approach, they considering international relations in terms of society of state. So the society of state, which means that the state are the actor, and there is a kind of anarchical things, means there is a kind of responsibility of the state to protect or to preserve the national interest or the national power of the state, but at the same time the state also having the responsibility towards the state system or other state also. So in that sense, that common goal, the common objective of every state, that create a kind of society and society of the state. So international society approach using the term the society international relations in terms of society of the state. So another point of view that we have already discussed about the international society approach is that the international society approach consider is the role of the state people, the role of the statecraft more or rather we can say the primary actor considered by international society approach are the people who are actually taking decision on behalf of the state, and they call the state people or the statecraft are the main actor of international relations. So in that sense, the statecraft's role is very important, and the basic things that we study in international relations is the decision related to foreign policy, decision related to any issues which are very important in the international relations, whether it is the conception of war, whether it is the issue of peace, whether the issue of disarmament, whether the issue of any sort of cooperations among the state or anything related to that. That are the important issues in international relations, but the international society approach consider that issues more a kind of exercise or more a kind of experience of the state people, which means that these sort of issues also require a kind of decision by the state people. So diplomacy, foreign policy, national interest, war, peace, these are the examples, these are the issues of the international relations, but over that a decision is required, and that decision is taken by the state people. So the role of the state people instead of the state, and also the issues that which is required a decision by the statecraft or the state person or the state people are the more important issues in the international society approach. So in that context, we can summarize the discussion that the international society approach is primarily considering is the role of the state peoples is very important, or the statecraft is very important, and that statecraft role and the responsibility, in that sense there are certain responsibilities of the statecraft vis-a-vis the nation-state system is concerned. So in that sense, the state people had certain responsibility. We can take the example of any issues that happened in the past or in the international system. On the basis of that, we can categorize the three types of responsibility that the statecrafts had. One is the national responsibility, another is the international responsibility, and last is the humanitarian responsibility. So if you take the example of Iraq crisis during the Saddam Hussein, the US and Iraq crisis, the Gulf crisis or the Iraq crisis more precisely, in that there is a kind of debate, and that debate is actually related to the statecraft's responsibility toward the nation-state system or towards the international relations. So in that sense, there was a kind of debate that whether the United States of America would go for war against Saddam Hussein or not. So one responsibility is to preserve the national interest and also the national security of the United States of America. So if the statecraft thinking that there must be a war to protect the national interest and the national security of the United States of America, that signifies that the role of the statecraft is also important in a sense that the major one of the important responsibility of the statecraft is to protect the national interest and also the citizens of the United States of America. So that sort of responsibility is more about a kind of realistic assumptions of the international system, which means that it is the primary role of the statecraft is to protect the national interest and the security and survival of the nation, and also at the same time the citizens of that particular nation. So the citizens of that particular or any particular nation become important because or at the virtue of the interest of the state or the protection and the survival of the state. So in that sense, it is the state protection or we can say the national interest is more important, and the state would not compromise anything that goes against the national interest. So this is one of the important things, as we have already discussed the three traditions of the international school or international relation traditions. In that realistic approach is one of the approach to understand one of the responsibility or the major responsibility of the statecraft, and that defined in terms of national responsibility. So while any sort of decision taken by the state people, one of the responsibility is the protection, survival of the national interest or the national security of a particular state, and at the same time the protection of the citizens of that particular state is equally very important. So in that case, we are discussing the Iraq as an important issue to understand that conception of international society approach. So in that sense, the another debate within that discourse or in the process of foreign policy making of the United States of America against Iraq during Saddam Hussein regime, the another responsibility or the debate that was there in the foreign policy making of the United States of America vis-a-vis to Iraq is concerned, that the United States of America also having the responsibility to abide the rules and regulations of the international law as well as the international organization, for example, the basic principles of the United Nations. So there was a kind of debate during that period that the United States of America must follow the basic principles or the basic provisions of the international law and also the basic legalities and the obligations that the United States of America have so far as the international organization, more precisely United Nations, is concerned. So that signifies the international responsibility of the statecraft, which is more related to the liberal interpretation of international relations, where the state is considered as a legal entity, and also at the same time state considered as a member or the responsible member of the state nation-state system or the state system. So in that context, the principles or obligation is to follow the basic principles of the international organizations and also the basic principles of the international law as well. So that signify the conception of responsibility of the statecrafts in the category of international responsibility. Third debate within that process, or the third concern within that process of the foreign policy making of the United States vis-a-vis Iraq is concerned, is that during that, if the United States of America go for war, then there will be a possibility, or there will be a killing of the innocent peoples of Iraq as well as there will be a killing of the people from the side of United States of America, means the soldiers of the United States of America, and also the soldier of the Iraq as well. So that humanitarian concern, the protection of the rights of the individuals in Iraq, and also the humanitarian concern or the of the military of the United States of America and also the Iraq, that concern is the another responsibility of the statecraft. So on the basis of that, we can say that the international relations is about a kind of foreign policy making or the decision making process, where the states people or the state person or the people who taking decision on behalf of the state has certain responsibility towards the nation, that is the national interest, and also have the responsibility towards the protection of the international law and international organizations, the values of the international law and international organization, and at the same time the state persons also having the responsibility towards the protection of the human rights, justice and equality of the all individuals living in any part of the world. So from that discussion, we can say that international society approach is basically focusing on the international relations in terms of the state person's responsibility, and that responsibility is expressed in terms of national responsibility, international responsibility and the humanitarian responsibility. So in short, we can say that the state person or the people who are engaged in the making of foreign policy or taking decision on behalf of the state, they are facing a kind of dilemma that we call as the moral dilemma. And that moral dilemma in terms of taking decision or in the process of making any sort of decision on behalf of the state people having the responsibility to fulfill the national responsibility, having the responsibility to fulfill the international responsibility, and having the responsibility to fulfill the humanitarian concerns of the international relations as well. So that three sort of responsibility, that is the national responsibility, international responsibility and the humanitarian responsibility, all three responsibility are considered very important responsibility of the state people. So in that context, the national responsibility that exhibit the realistic approach, the international responsibility that express in terms of liberal approach, and the humanitarian responsibility expressed in terms of global society approach or the revolutionary approach given by Immanuel Kant. So these are the important responsibility of the statecraft. So now, so far we have discussed about the international society approach, what international society approach is all about, and then we discussed the basic responsibility of the statecraft that expressed in terms of national responsibility, international responsibility and humanitarian responsibility, and all three responsibility of the statecraft are equally important, and on the basis of experience, certain values of the statecraft is actually taking decision. So in that context, the humanitarian response, that two responsibility, the national responsibility is the realistic approach, that is very dominating kind of responsibility of the state person, but in the contemporary time, that international responsibility and the humanitarian responsibility are more debatable, and there is a more focus on these two dimensions of the statecraft responsibility, that international responsibility and the humanitarian responsibility, which means that the humanitarian responsibility, that the citizens living in any part of the world, they are equally important to every nations, and because these people that the international society approach focusing international relation in terms of world society or global society, so the protection of the rights of the individuals or the people of any country, it is the responsibility or the humanitarian responsibility of the statecrafts while making any sort of decision to protect rights, that is the human rights of every people living in any part of the world, is equally important. So that responsibility is now given much important that two responsibility, international responsibility and humanitarian responsibility. But at the same time, that national responsibility is a very dominant kind of responsibility. So that all three responsibility are the important responsibility that are given importance while the statecraft is taking any sort of foreign policy vis-a-vis to other state is concerned. So these are the things that we have to know so far as the statecrafts and responsibility in the nation state system is concerned, and that interpretation is done by the international society approach. So now we can conclude with the discussion over the critiques of the international society approach. So that as we have already discussed about the international society approach, that the international society approach is not discarding any school of thought or any classical school of thought, that is the liberalism, realism and also the revolutionarism. So rather the international society approach argued that there is a kind of constant debate among the all three traditions of the international relations: liberalism, rationalism and globalism, or we can say the revolutionarism. But at the same time, that the realist school of thought, the liberal school of thought, international political economy and also and the world society view, that is the solidaritist international relation or the tradition of the international relations, they also criticize at the same time to the international society approach. Realism saying that they criticize the international society approach in a sense that the international society approach consider international relations as a society of sovereign state, which means that the realistic approach of international relations consider it is the structure, right? We can give the example of Kenneth Walsh and other realistic school of international exponent of the realistic school of international relations. They viewed that state system is very important, the structure is very important, and state are the primary actors and they interact in the state system, and that state system is expressed in terms of anarchical condition. So that structure is taken by the international society approach, but they modified the things in a way that they consider that it is not the state system, rather it is the state society, rather it is the system of the society, which means that there is a common goal before the state, and every state try to achieve that, and that create that common goal, or the common creation of the common achieving the common goal and creation of the common institutions to achieve the common goal or international law. These are the important things through that the state system can be replaced by the anarchical society of the sovereign state. So, and the realistic approach considered that the anarchical situation, anarchy in the state system is very important and natural things, and because of that they criticize the international society approach. For example, we can cite the Hobbesian conception regarding the state of nature, that he said that the state behave in a selfish way and state sovereignty is paramount, and the state would not compromise any sort of regulations which goes against the national interest of the state or the national sovereignty of a particular state. So that reality was not considered by the international society approach. Because of that reason, the realistic school think that it's a kind of shortcoming in the interpretation of the international society approach to look at the dynamics of international relations. On the other hand, the liberal school of thought also criticized the international society approach in a sense that the international society approach is again focusing on the anarchical situation, state system, which means that there is a kind of the state system is there where the state interact with the other state in the nation state system, but there is a common goal that must be achieved. So that conflicting kind of situation or the utopian kind of situation is not taken by the international society approach, and because of that reason, that utopia and idealism, discarding that by the international society approach, the liberal school of thought or the liberal tradition of international relation, they also criticize the international society approach. The another school of thought that we call or approach that we call the international political economy. The international political economy approach to international relations also criticize the understanding or the discussion or look at the dynamics of international relations from the perspective of international society approach. They argued that the international society approach not focusing much on the economic dimension or the economic aspect of the international relations. The international society approach, like in the case of realistic approach and liberal approach, they're focusing more about security, survival, cooperations, political cooperation, peace, harmony, but hardly give any sort of discussion on the part of economic interaction, economic exchange among the state in the nation-state system. So from that point of view, international political economy approach also criticizing the international society approach. So the realistic criticize the international society approach from the perspective of structure. Liberal approach criticizing the international society approach because of the absence of any sort of much cooperations among the states, and also considering that state system is equally important, national interest is equally important, and that conflict is bound to happen. That is the reality. On the basis of that, liberal school of international relations also criticized the international political society approach, and also they argued that the domestic influences in the making of foreign policy, the democracy, the propagation of democracy, where the democratic peace theory, where the democracy can be the various democracy in the international system or in the international society can achieve peace, can achieve more cooperation. So that part are also missing in the interpretation of international society approach. From that point of view, the liberal also criticized that. The international political economy approach criticized international relations on the basis of absence of any sort of interpretation from the economic perspective or economic engagement or economic cooperations among the nation-state system. The last criticism, that is the solidaritist criticism against the international society approach, is from the perspective of transnational society, global society, and global injustice. So the common things in all three categorization of solidaritist approach is that the international relations is basically considered from the realistic point of view is the pluralistic conception, which means that there is a various state in the nation-state system and state behave in an independent way, autonomous way, and the basic objective of the every state is to protect the rights and security of the state and the survival of the state. So it's make a kind of polarity in the nation-state system. Unlike that, the solidaritist calling that it is not the pluralistic nature of the international relations, rather it is the responsibility of the major powers to protect the rights of the smaller power and also to protect the individuals living in any part of the world. So that is what there must be a kind of solidarity among the every nations in the nation-state system, and that responsibility is much towards the major powers or the bigger powers to protect the rights of the smaller powers. So in that sense, that the solidarity is that there must be a solidarity among the state, and also that the responsibility of the state person is to protect the rights of every citizens or the every people, individuals living in any part of the world. So from that is considered or well taken by the international society approach, but at the same time the solidaritist approach or to look at the international relation is also criticizing the international society approach. They argued that the international society approach is also given importance to the state system, that is the international relation is the anarchical society of state, which means that anarchy which prevail in the state system, because of that reason state again a primary unit that interact in the states in the nation-state system. So that transnational society where the state boundary has meaningless, the global society where the state boundary has less meaning, and on the basis of that the international society approach is failed to propagate and promote the global society where the interest of the every person or the common people is more important rather to the importance and the survival and the security of the state. So the conception of global security, the conception of human security, the conception of human goal, that are more important in the discussion of international relations from the perspective of global society and transnational society. So that conception purely is missing in the international society approach to look at the dynamics of international relations. And last is the conception of global justice, where the people living in any part of the world, more predominantly the smaller state, the people who belongs to or having the citizenship of the smaller state, that is the third world society or the underdeveloped society, the protection of the rights of these people is the primary or should be the primary responsibility of the every state or we can say the global society. So the conception of global society, where the interest of every people or the conception of social world or global society is focusing basically on to protect the rights of the every citizens living in any part of the world. So that conception of global justice is missing in the case of international society approach. So that international conception or global conception of injustice is also criticizing the international society approach. So these are the criticism or these are the perspective to look at the shortcomings which is there in the international society approach. In conclusion, we can say that the international society approach is basically combined all three traditions or the positive things in all three traditions of the international relations. So in that sense, it is alternative perspective to look at, or the different perspective to look at the dynamics of international relations, where they given much importance to the responsibility of the statecraft and the role of the statecraft in making foreign policy, and the basic responsibility of the statecraft that expressed in terms of national responsibility, humanitarian responsibility, and also international responsibility. And they argued that there are certain common goals before the state, and to achieve that common goal, a common institutions can be made. And another basic importance things which is interpreted by the international society approach is the concern of the humanity, concern of the humankind. So these are the positive argument or the positive thing which is again put forwarded by the international society approach, and which make a kind of distinct and alternative concept of tradition or theory or approach to understand international relations or international politics. With that, I stop here, and I hope that topics of international relations in that we have discussed the basic things about the international society or approach to look at the dynamics of international relations, and the basic values of the international society approach that explain in terms of order and justice, and the conception of statecraft, state people, and their responsibility towards the national, to protect the national interest or international responsibility, and also the humanitarian concern and humanitarian responsibility. We discuss at large, and I hope that we have already discussed the things in detail, and hope that everyone has understand the topics in a well manner. Thank you very much. With that, I stop here. In the next class, we will start a new discussion related to topic of international relations. Thank you.